Hi everyone. Good morning. It's good to be here with you today. I'm Juliana, and we're going to be talking about DEI today. I'm going to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and share a brief anecdote about their work with inclusion and diversity.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Kerwin. I'm here from Medela, which is a medical device company that makes breast pumps, among other things. And for the company, I am responsible for our employer program and our government affairs and advocacy work. And as a working mom, the work that I do to support new moms going back to work through our company is really close to my heart because I have lived it. And so I realize how hard it is for moms, but also on the employer side, how hard it can be for a company to communicate correctly and make the right connection. So excited to be here today talking about this with all of you.
Hi everyone, great to be with you. I'm Katie Mooney, she, her, Managing Director of Saramount. Saramount is a professional services and research advisory firm, really helping organizations on their journey to accomplish diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really building a culture of inclusion in your workplace. I think just an anecdote for me, especially right now as we're thinking about what is diversity and inclusion in this moment, it's almost to pause to really reflect on what aren't you doing to build an inclusive workplace right now, because we need it more than ever.
Agreed. Good morning, Jennifer Brunell from NRG Energy. We are a leading energy and home services company that's powered by people that are passionate about smart, clean, and connected energy futures. I'm the VP of Talent Acquisition, Diversity, Development, and Employee Experience, and I've been with the company for 14 years. The intersectionality of identity and belonging are what moves me to work in this space. I'm an NPE, which means not parent expected, which means that I found out later in life about my ethnicity. So I found a lot of interesting intersectionality in that space and choose to move in a way that allows people to authentically live their lives. So happy to be here with everyone.
Wonderful. Hi, my name's Christy Small. I'm the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at NFI Industries. NFI is a third-party logistics provider. It has been family owned and run for 90 years, and we have 16,000 employees from coast to coast and in Canada. When I think about the diversity work, I have an anecdote about what drew me to it and what brought me into it. I was at my prior employer and I was asked to help start an employee resource group about disability inclusion. And I did, and I was asked to do it because I was a lawyer at the time. They're like, she'll do all the boring stuff, like the bylaws and the minutes. And then about 6 months later, I had been engaged with this ERG doing disability inclusion, and the voluntary SelfID form came in my email. And it listed on it what I called my condition at the time, but that I never called a disability. And as a lawyer, I Googled to make sure it's the right form. I think it's the wrong form. But I eventually realized that, my own ableism was making me not identify as an individual with a disability. And since then, I disclosed first to my employee resource group, this community I made for myself, and now I speak publicly about it. And I recognize that that's sort of what drew me to continuing a career in diversity, was this first sort of shock when I see that form and my condition listed on it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Roden. I work at Chubb. I have the awesome privilege of overseeing our culture and inclusion strategy. Chubb is a global insurance company. We operate in 54 countries and territories around the world. We have 35,000 employees, and I lead the work for our North American segment, which makes up about 60% of our business. In my role, I do a few things. I work with our business leaders to help them craft diversity, equity, inclusion strategies. I work with our HR partners to help make sure that we're driving equity into our talent practices, everything from compensation to benefits to TA. I also oversee our employee networks, which we call business roundtables at Chubb. Those are inclusive communities. And then I help to oversee our inclusive partnerships, strategic partners. When I think about the work that we do, what we strive to do is really creating an ecosystem where life can thrive. And so there's 3 statements that we want people to be able to say naturally at our organization. One is that I belong at Chubb, that they feel like they have a right to be there, that they feel like Chubb cares about them, so I matter at Chubb. And then lastly, I'm thriving at Chubb. That's the work that I strive to do every day.
Thank you. So to start, in order to do DEI work, we need to know what the baseline is and where we're at. And so I'm curious, I tossed this question to Jennifer and Katie, though I'd encourage the other panelists to jump in. How do you collect data? What kinds of data are you collecting to figure out where your company is in the moment?
So I guess I'll start. It's really about the candidate pipeline all the way through the employee exit. We were talking backstage, and it's this notion that it's not a singular event. We're starting to collect data as people are applying for positions. And then we're monitoring everything from when they onboard to how they're excelling, whether they're an individual contributor or if they're on a management track, all the way through whenever they leave the organization. And that allows us to measure the baseline of where we are to where we aspire to be, and we do have KPIs and clearly defined goals that are time-bound and specific. And it lets us see where employees are dropping out and where those pain points are. So it is intentional, it is designed with purpose, and it has clearly defined rigor around it so that we can measure this and we can hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'd agree. I mean, so Saramount, one of the things I'm most proud about in doing this work is that we have a benchmark, an inclusion index that we've been running for the past 15 years. And so when you think about holistically, kind of looking at the programmatic elements, as you totally demonstrated, from representation numbers, where do we fit, where do we fall, what does this look like as for different talent and job levels in the organization, but also those who are diverse and of historically underrepresented and excluded talent populations. Secondly is, what are the practices you're leading in measuring your advancement to whether it be recruitment and retention strategies, talent development, succession planning slates. So completely agree with that. And then finally, how are we looking at other measures like accountability? Are we creating opportunities where leaders feel that they are accountable, incentivized in some cases for the work that they're doing to lead inclusion? So you mirror kind of the baseline, and I always tell beginning, and I would say CDOs, to always start with the questions to inform your baseline. From there, you can only track progress from there, and do it year over year. The second piece is, I think we have to really be listening to our people right now, using the qualitative data. We have this tool called an employee voice session, which is an anonymized focus group where people will come and share. Are they thinking about new opportunities in the organization, or are they are planning to leave the organization? A social justice uprising event, the things we can't talk about at work anymore, is suddenly things people want to talk at work about. So what are the benefits they need? What are the tools that they need right now? And so providing that anonymous focus group environment allows psychological safety and, quite frankly, transparency. And so I think the two kind of complement themselves in the baseline and then align to really embedding DEI, as you've talked about also.
And how do you figure out where to focus your DEI efforts? You know, there's race, there's gender, there's sexuality, there's new parents, there's a lot to look at. David, can you talk about how you've made that decision at your company?
Yeah. So I'll begin with how we sort of shape the work. So we shape it under culture. So we have a chief culture office, not a diversity office. And that's because we believe culture is all encompassing, right? It touches everything regarding how you work. And so we do a few things. So one, we empower our leaders, no matter where they are in the organization, to adopt an inclusive and equitable lens. So whether it's procurement, whether it's HR COEs, so that we're touching a little bit of everything all the time. So we're touching compensation, we're touching talent acquisition, we're touching procurement practices. The other piece is we want to make sure that we pay attention to the broader context. So one, what's happening, what's our business and talent strategy? What's happening in the macroeconomic environment, but also what Katie mentioned, what are our employees saying? And I think that's what it comes down to for us. If our employees are having an issue or if there's something that's really important to them, we want to make sure we listen to that. So we want to be aware of what's happening contextually, but also make sure that we're meeting our employees where they are. So I'll give you an example. One of the things initiative we just launched recently was a focus on Black women at Chubb. And McKinsey came out with their report this year, right, the Women in the Workplace report with Lean In, and it had a huge focus on the experience of Black women. Well, that report came out, and then we heard from our Black women in our organization who said, we see this report, we want to tell you about our experience. So we leaned into them, leaning into us, right, to kind of say, we want to talk about this here at Chubb and what this means for us. So we did some listening, we did some surveying, and then we developed the Black Women of Chubb Collective, which is a new initiative that was started, but it was sort of grassroots, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were paying attention to what's happening in the marketplace, but also what are our employees feeling? I'll give you another example. We recently just launched SelfID. So we have a new HR system, and SelfID was brought up by our LGBTQ plus colleagues, and we weren't able to address it for several years, but we kept hearing from our colleagues and saying, this is something we want. We want to be counted. We want to make sure that we're tracked in the system. We want to make sure that we're being treated equitably as well. And so we recently launched that initiative, but it was brought about by our employees. So it's paying attention to what's happening macro, but also what's happening inside your organization. What are your employees saying? What's really important to them? Because at the end of the day, that's who's driving your business. That's who you're leading. That's who you're stewarding.
Can you just briefly explain what SelfID?
Yeah, so SelfID is a data collection or data-driven initiative to help employees volunteer dimensions of their identity, of who they are. So it could be a gender identity, so whether you identify with your pronouns, right, he, him, his, she, her, hers, you could be non-binary. It allows you to share your sexual orientation, if that's a part of your identity. It allows you to share your disability status, your military status, and any other status that's important to who you are. Because how you see someone is not exactly how they see themselves. And so in order for us to really be inclusive and meet people where they are, we have to understand how they see themselves. That way we can truly embrace who they are. And so it allows us to look at diversity broader than just some of the traditional demographics of race and gender, to really understand how people see themselves and how we can meet them where they are.
And I just might add a small anecdote to what David said, because I love that you're continuing to focus on all employees. There's enough newsworthy news right now about DEI having rollbacks, people questioning diversity and inclusion, the SCOTUS rulings. And so we're following kind of what we're calling these volatile times of us doing work in DEI right now. But it's interesting because what isn't in the headlines is that DEI is actually very strong right now because there's accountability measures in place, because there's identification campaigns and ways in which we're driving this business. And so I think when you think about race, gender, ethnicity, like when people put kind of different of the this or that, I think as practitioners, we have to really be focused on the and. Why it's good for all employees, that it's not, I think there's that famous diversity inclusion isn't like pie. It doesn't mean just because I have a slice, it doesn't mean you don't get a slice. And so how in this time, these kind of volatile times as we're calling, how do we center inclusion so that all of us have a great place to work, a great place to be engaged and involved in our talent life cycle?
Dana, can you tell us about the program that you've been running at your company about new parents and bringing new parents back to work? How did you make that decision to focus on that? How did you get folks on board?
Absolutely. So as a company that makes breast pumps, we talk to a lot of moms. We do a lot of research on that experience. And what we were hearing is a lot of women said, I didn't feed as long as I wanted to. And a lot of them were telling us it was because they went back to work, and it was because they didn't have a space to pump, or they couldn't get time in the day, or they felt guilty trying to take advantage of their space and time because they felt like they were supposed to be working, or different cultural pressures. And as a company that advocates for the rights of families to make their own decisions about how they feed their infant, we said, I think there's an opportunity here for us to educate and bring solutions to the table. So we launched a program that is aimed at employers, and it's designed to help solve very practical needs. We have products and services that are specifically meant to be rolled out as benefits, but also a lot of education and cultural development as well. And so, what we have found in bringing this into the market and talking to a lot of employers is that sometimes issues are driven by a lack of awareness. If you don't happen to be a breastfeeding mom, you may not know what the experience is like. And so some of it is happening just out of, good intentions, but ignorance. And we've also found that in the last year, with the rollout of new legislation like the Pump Act and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, that a lot of companies that maybe weren't really worried about it are suddenly starting to lean in from a compliance perspective. And so it's been a great opportunity for us to work with companies to educate on compliance, to make sure people understand the federal regulations, what protections exist now for working parents, and then also help them understand that not only are there bottom line benefits and compliance reasons to do this, but to the conversation we're just having about culture, when you create a workplace where a parent can come back, feel supported in the decisions that they're making for their family, you actually get a lot of extra benefit from both people feeling engaged and people wanting to stay longer. And the beautiful thing is as well, there's a real halo effect. We know not every parent feeds their baby the same way. Not every parent comes back and wants to pump at work. Some parents, by the time these benefits roll out, are past that period. But what we're finding in pilots we've done, in surveys we've done, is that there's a real halo effect to investing in new parents because other employees see that and they say, well, I'm not pumping, I don't need that benefit. But the company is obviously very proactive in this and supportive of this. And so what I need is, time to pick my kid up or take them to the pediatrician or participate in some other parent-related activity. And by creating space and talking about what you're doing, it really elevates that discussion for all the working parents in the organization.
Christy, can you tell us about your DEI journey at work? How new is your role and what was the impetus for it being created? And how have you worked on changing the culture at your company?
Absolutely. And I will sort of follow up a little bit on what I've heard so far. Amazing program that your company's doing. And one of the earlier questions to David, I think, was like, how do you pick and choose? What do you focus on? And the answer is you don't. You have to focus on everything. And even your best laid plans, you always have to be ready to pivot, hear from your employees, hear from your customers, and hear from the community, and make sure you're doing the right thing. I have been in this space at my prior employer, and then I moved over to NFI in April of last year. And one of the reasons that I moved there, maybe two of them, is first off, they were a little bit more junior on their journey. So they were doing a lot of right things. They maybe just hadn't defined the why or created the enterprise-wide strategy behind it. The second thing that really made me excited about it was that they were interested in advancing their diversity and inclusion for the right reasons. It's a family-owned business by the Browns for the last 90 years, and they recognize that this journey is the right thing to do and has ancillary business benefits. They're not being influenced just by shareholders or other CEOs who think it's the right thing to do. So that has really created this space for me to come in and do amazing things. We've launched our employee resource groups. We have developed an enterprise-wide diversity strategy. We had an executive diversity council, but now it's the most representative executive diversity council. We have women's leadership program, and we just launched for BIPOC HIPO leadership programs. So it's amazing work, but that gets done because the leaders really want it to be done. So it's been a great challenge, and I'm really looking forward to the next, several years of the company.
I think that's huge, and I'll jump on as well because I think that's exactly right. Executive buy-in is so important. I don't think that, certainly they can't just will DEI into being from the top, but if they aren't bought in, if they don't believe it, if they're not talking about it, and if they're not acting it in their work, it's so hard for this kind of stuff to succeed. And like with a new parent lens, one of the things that we talk about is companies that offer parental leave. Amazing. Do the executives take it? You have to, you offer unlimited PTO. Okay, that's great, but then you need your leadership team taking time away from the office and signaling that these things are okay, because it really does matter what you're showing your workforce, not what you're telling them.
If there needs to be buy-in from the top, is it like it's there or it's not? How do we move people? And I'll open this up to the whole panel. Maybe Katie, you'd be a good person to start.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the data because, again, we released the 2023 Seramount Inclusion Index, and one of the questions we ask every single year is accountability, leadership accountability. And of our organizations, the 155 who participated in for 2023, we have continued to ask them how. How are you demonstrating accountability? Not just that there is. What evidence do we have there? And one of the things notably since 2020, I think 2019, we started out about 38% of those organizations that submitted their data said, we're accountable. But interesting, of all the demographics and the data we collect, the just incline of every year over year, 38% was in 2019. Then after 2020, we saw that in the kind of 50%. The following year, we were at 68%. And right now, we're about 84% of organizations that submit have an evidence of accountability, and that will, we believe, continue to rise. So whether that is through performance management, of course, from incentivizing as well, but then also how are we seeing opportunities where leaders are serving, whether it's an executive sponsor role on employee resource groups, whether it is ensuring that their slate of candidates is diverse, or that their even interviewers are diverse when speaking with potential new talent in the organization. Of course, we think about ways in which they're fostering inclusive leadership for people. But more importantly, I think while accountability at the top is absolutely critical, and there is evidence of it as evidenced in the benchmark, what we have to do a better job of also is the next level down and then from there, because whether you are out in a warehouse, whether you're out in a retail store, it's really a challenge for us to get out into those spaces where so much productivity happens, where cultures can be created for better or for worse. And so how do we really think about accountability, but then also equipping leaders dispersed to really be leading with inclusion as well?
Can I add on to that too? When we talk about sort of why leaders engage, we also have to ask them, why aren't you engaging? And more often than not, it's because they're afraid of making a mistake. So when we have to recognize that, and that there's this fear of failure in this space, in the business world, not just for diversity work, like leaders who have been successful at everything they've done in their career don't want to embark on something that they might fail at. So as HR professionals, as D&I professionals, we have to give people like the grace to try and potentially fail at it and to try again. So I love when you mentioned executive sponsors of ERGs. I think that's sort of a risk-free way for somebody to get more engaged. It might be harder for them to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with their nursing mother employee, but they have to do it all, and they have to recognize that it's okay to make a mistake if you're doing it with genuine care and apologizing and learning from the mistake. So fear is at the bottom of why people are not doing it.
I think another piece, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about a conversation I had with somebody who heads DE&I in their organization, and she was talking about how there's so much good intention but so little written down, and that a big push that they're working on right now is creating policies that help preserve and document how the company approaches these things, both to I think help educate, but also to give guidance so that managers have resources to turn to. People who are running stores or manufacturing centers have a common place. And you can start to create some consistency, again, from a new mother's perspective or new parent's perspective. When you come back to work, and we hear this all the time, so much of what that's like depends on who you work for. And it can be in a company that's very forward thinking. You can have a very supportive executive team, but if your boss doesn't have an experience as a parent and doesn't know what to do, or they're afraid of making a mistake, they don't know what the policy is, they don't say anything, and one person's experience is, I didn't feel like I could talk about it, I didn't feel like I could ask for help, I was just kind of off in the corner by myself. And you'll have a colleague of that person on a different team whose manager was also a breastfeeding parent, and they say, oh my gosh, here's a room and I'm gonna get snacks for you, and let's make sure that the calendar works. And they're solving all of those needs because they know and they've lived it. Those two employees working for the same company are having a night and day experience, and there's so much opportunity to talk about what's going on and to create a policy that says, no matter who you work for, no matter which office or location you belong to, no matter what department you're in, you can expect this baseline experience. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity, to your point, to free people by saying it's okay to talk about this. And in fact, you should talk about it, and here's a guide. Here's the things you should walk through, and help managers and supervisors open that door with employees.
I just want to double click. I think that's such an important point. I just want to double click on that, because much of what we call the employee experience is not driven by what your CEO says. It's what your manager does. It's what the managers do every day. And I will tell you, middle management plays such a critical role in this work. A lot of times what you'll see happen is employees, professional level employees, will have an issue and they'll bring it to executives, right? And the executives want to hear directly from the employees, what's going on? I want to hear directly from the people. And they'll start making promises, right? I'm going to fix it. Here's what we're going to do. But they fail to engage the middle. And middle management is so key when you think about their role, because they take the strategy and they operationalize it. They make it a reality. And so when they're left out of the conversation, a few things happen. One, they feel like something else is being pushed on them. I have to figure this out. You've made this promise and I don't know what to do. And then they kind of get a little bit disgruntled. You get inconsistency, right, in application. And you have some employees that are having a great time. And then a few rows down, right, employees are having a bad time. So you get inconsistency, and you get a fractured culture actually that way. It starts to fracture your culture. And so I think it's so important that we engage middle managers in this work, hearing their voice, helping them, engaging them to co-create solutions, because that's their specialty, right? They know how to take the thing and make it actually really happen. And so I think that's a big miss for us when we don't engage middle management, when we don't engage them to co-create solutions. Then I find that we get inconsistency, we get fracturing, and you get a very fractured employee experience. Yeah.
Jennifer, I want to bring you into the conversation. How is this landing with you? And can you talk to us about challenges you've faced in your DEI work and how you've overcome them?
Sure. I think, in concert with the rest of my co-panelists, you can't be performative, and you have to know your own organization. And if there are people out there whose leadership is going to be resistant and you're saying, that's great, but, then at least empower them to listen to your employees, because that's how you start to have common experiences, shared experiences, and you get to know where your employees are coming from. So that is critical. At our organization, we have a large US and Canadian footprint. We touch every red and blue state, and it is polarizing. And that is, I mean, there are absolutely challenges on both sides. We're not making anybody happy. But that being said, when you take it down to this common notion, this baseline of psychological safety, that we all want agency over our being, we all want to be heard, we all want respect. And when we start from that place, then we can build. It's not, oh, we do this, and we're pretty far along on our journey at NRG. But that being said, something can happen that's external, and employees want to know, why aren't we responding? Or why did you respond that way? So it's boiling it down to these basic fundamentals of people have their beliefs. We're not here to convert them. We're here to create a dialogue. We're here for a business purpose, and we're going to layer this on top of that purpose so that we all feel that this is a company that we're proud to work for, that's representative of everyone in the room, and that they can bring that individual self to work and not feel disrespected.
Yeah, I might add, just in spirit to that, again, when we launch these, what we call employee voice sessions. These are these anonymous sessions where you come in with a username. So I'm not Katie or you're not Jennifer, it's your ABC123 or I'm XYZ456. And it's interesting because we'll have a CEO join anonymously to watch kind of what happens in the focus group because we are still preserving psychological safety through anonymity. And so to see leaders kind of open their eyes, to your point about needing to listen, seeing the data, seeing how many people plus one somebody else's statement, how many people identify what do they need right now in light of the polarities at work, for example, or the rise of Asian hate, for example, when that has historically occurred. You can really craft and collect the right data to inform solution. And I think that is one of the aspects, to your point about just having to need that psychological safety, but then also having, of course, the data round out to say, yes, these are the areas where we should be spending our time in the going forward.
Can we talk about some concrete changes that you've made at your company? Like, we used to do it this way, and now we do it this way, and what that impact has looked like. Maybe we can start with Christy.
Wow, that was a question off of the coffin. I'm going to try to get ready. Okay, so I've been at the company for a little bit over a year and a half. Here's something to follow up on some data. We actually do have a pulse survey tool that goes out to all of our employees, I think like 1 day, 7 days, 9 days, 30 days, and then every 90 days after that. And I was able to look at it and realize that several of the questions in the pulse survey are really measuring inclusion. Look a lot like an engagement survey questions. So just recently, the vendor was able to add filters so I could see the responses to those questions and filter it by gender, by race, by ethnicity, veteran status, age, and disability status. Now, why that's important is every work group does not necessarily have what you assume is the majority. So some work groups, the majority might be Hispanic women. And when you see that score, you're only seeing Hispanic women until you're able to really filter it for different identities. So I think that's a powerful change in how we did business, that there's not just a work step score for a location, there is a filterable work step score for that location. And that's how we're using data.
I think one of the changes, and actually this is a change that rolled out at Medela for our own employees, but we made changes to our own parental leave program. We rolled out more leave, fully paid, but one of the things that we intentionally did was made it available equally to every employee. So whether you're the birthing parent or not, whether you're full-time or part-time, we wanted to make sure that every employee had the chance to take leave when they had a baby. And part of that, as a company that's all about infant and maternal health and nutrition, like that was certainly a piece of it. But also from an equity perspective, we want to break down the distinctions between people who take birthing leave and people who take non-birthing leave, right? We want to make sure that you don't accidentally, by rolling out really generous leave benefits, but only to the birthing parent, you can still cause a lot of gender discrepancy to persist because you have birthing parents taking 3 months off or 4 months off and non-birthing parents taking 3 weeks off. And so from a hiring perspective and a management perspective, you can create perceptional differences that we don't want there. And furthermore, when you get into the research that looks at what that means for employees coming back to work, what they found is that when non-birthing parents are more involved, when they're more supportive, birthing parents go back to work at higher rates and tend to be more successful and have less financial impact in the long run because they're sharing that load, and that non-birthing parent is supporting all of the responsibilities at home in a different way. So that was a big policy change that we made very intentionally for a number of reasons. And with a lot of big movement around paid leave for families, it's been exciting to see changes, but I think sometimes we're still leaving a lot of opportunity on the table when we create really significant disparity.
One initiative I'll share, it's in progress, so we're not quite there yet, but I'm really proud of it. And it's a focus on career equity. A few years ago, we started to really focus on upward mobility and look at what are the factors that impact that. And we started auditing our performance ratings, right? Performance ratings are such a key driver of your next step, right? Your promotion, your lateral move. And we saw some opportunities there. We looked at the data and we saw some disparities that we didn't like. So we took corrective action. We looked at it again another year, saw similar issues, took corrective action. And most recently, we made the decision that we're overhauling our performance management process. We're completely redesigning it globally because we recognize we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. We've tried it, it hasn't worked. And so I'm proud to say that we're in the process of doing that now. We're working with an external vendor, and I think it's really gonna help us from a career equity perspective. So still in progress, but I think it's so important to take a look at those key factors that are driving, right, some of the disparities that you have. So I'm glad that we're taking steps to move in that new direction, and I'm excited for the future outcome.
What do DEI executives need to be successful? I feel like I have heard about these roles being created and they feel more like tokens and they're disempowered within their organization. So what's needed to make sure it works?
I think, to me, it's the business case. If you can tie this to your business case, and I think psychological safety is a great example of that. If you have psychologically safe teams that are not afraid to speak out, then they can pinpoint when a procedure isn't working or a product isn't ready to roll out. So they're empowered and enabled to speak up. So we start with psychological safety as that baseline because regardless of where you are on a DE&I spectrum of bought in or maybe a skeptic, if we can tie it back to the business case, we're slowly chipping away at this notion of, oh, this is a waste of time, or this is performative, or this is woke. It's not. But we're speaking in a universal language that's meeting all employees at the same place. So for us, tying it to the business case, working with our government affairs team to see where legislatures are voting in certain states on AI, and is this going to be a problem in terms of bias built into a program? We're leaning on them. They appreciate that. We work with our legal team. We work with our business resource groups. We work with our business lines because ultimately our customers need to, and they do look like us, right? So if it's not working because of somebody's ability status and we don't have text to read software, if we're not descriptive in our LinkedIn photos, we're missing potential customers. So bringing it back to the bottom line and to the business is really something that even the biggest naysayers can't argue. So it's a bit of a tool, but it's one that's worked for us.
I'll add to that because it's so incredibly important. On Thursday, I'm spending time with our Chief Diversity Officers Collaborative. So it's about 90 CDOs coming together to ask that very important question of what do we need right now? And you're so spot on in terms of the business case. And I think also too, especially to that point when we're talking about enough of the external market saying, is D&I really matter? Should you really have a diverse talent strategy for one isolated or other isolated groups? Like with this kind of scrutiny that we're seeing, again, in those headlines, situationally getting to that case is incredibly important. So I think about, to your point, the how you measure good for business. Sephora increased 30% of profitability by enabling opportunities for shelf space in their retail stores dedicated to Black-owned brands, creating a very large opportunity to attract the diverse customer and the customer needs. I think secondly, I think also too about cost savings. So I think about Edward Jones and how they use their ERGs in a recruitment strategy to really then showcase attracting talent through recommendation and referral, and created $460,000 of cost savings for talent acquisition. They didn't have to go to an external search partner. They didn't have to lean on additional resources here. So they were able to actually correlate that back to $460,000 of cost savings. So how are we articulating when keeping a diversity and equity and inclusion lens in all of the things we're doing? How are we able to tell that story more broader and wider?
And that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much to our panelists.